So a little bit about SingleKey. We started just before that famous world event called COVID. Here's the early days on our CEO Viler. I think this is when they had a staff of 2 or 3 people. He's working outside his condo. Now we've reached we're north of 20 employees, probably another support staff of 10 to 15 on various contractor roles. So we've really grown quite a bit over the last 4 years. So as it stands today, we've got three core products. Also, we're going to talk about the Rent Gurantee. We do offer 2 other offerings. We're probably most popularly known for is our comprehensive report. The same information that you would get as if a bank was to pull your credit and to lend you on a mortgage. We give you all the same information as a homeowner to make that decision to rent to someone. We've got both direct access to both credit bureaus, so Equifax and TransUnion. I think we're the only credit checking service out there right now that does both services at once. And we're definitely the only one that does international credit checks. That's something new in the last. Right now, Nova Credit will allow you to cover 80% of all new Canadian applicants coming to this country. So we've got really good coverage internationally speaking. Basically, we're trying to arm you guys with the most amount of information to make the most informed decision possible. Next is rent collection. It's free for up to 3 leases per month. It's automated. It's very similar to pre-authorized debit. So if you pay a utility bill out of a checking account, it's very much the same process. We're now going on to the new products and features. I'll loop in Hannah. Go ahead, Hannah. It's all yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mackenzie, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. As Mac mentioned, I'm going to be going over a bit of our rent guarantee program and steps that landlords can take to protect their rental income as they're renting out their properties. There's a few steps that we recommend when you're looking for a tenant. The first step is to make sure you're properly screening your tenants. When you're going through this tenant screening process, that's really your top opportunity to be able to go through the tenant's proof of income, go through all their documents, and make sure that you're doing your due diligence before placing them at your property. Because once you rented them, it's a lot harder to get them out once they're already living there, right? The second step is to automate your rent collection. So as Mackenzie mentioned, we do offer an automated rent collection service. So you're not having to go after the tenant and chase them for an e-transfer or worry about depositing checks every month. We'll automatically pull that from your tenant's account and then deposit it to your account. And then the final step would be to guarantee your rent with the right coverage. So with our rent guarantee, we're going to dive into the program a bit further throughout the presentation. But with the rent guarantee, we're going to make sure that should something ever happen and your tenant does default on the rent, you'll still be getting the rent payments from us at SingleKey, so you can still cover the mortgage and cover your other property expenses. And you're not having to worry about covering that out of pocket for the 9 or 10 months that it's taking to evict your tenant.
First, to introduce myself, I'm Viler, the founder and CEO here at SingleKey. We kind of got this business up and running about 5 years ago, really with the aim of protecting landlords from renters that don't pay rent, damage your property, and ultimately make sure that you always get your rent check at the end of the month, so you can always cover your mortgage payments and property expenses, even if the tenant defaults for whatever reason. So today I'll cover 2 things. First of all, I'm excited to announce some new features, and then later on in the presentation, we'll talk a bit about some of our rent guarantee demands and claims, and you should get a sense of kind of what that looks like as well. So first things first, we're continuing to invest very heavily in really upgrading our infrastructure for having the best tenant screening due diligence tool out there available for small homeowners like yourselves. And we're constantly adding new features. So a couple of new ones are the Co-Applicant invites, the tenant portal, and the international credit check. Quickly share my screen if you don't mind, just so I can kind of show some of these things in action. So right now I'm on my report or my tenant portal or my landlord portal, and I've run a number of reports. Recently, this spring, we actually added the ability to run both Equifax as well as TransUnion reports. And now we even have what's called a dual report, which is pretty cool. For those of you who are not aware, a dual report basically combines both Equifax and TransUnion to offer you data from both credit bureaus. The reason this is important is that we discovered that especially collection agencies or trade lines only report to one bureau, not both, because it's a lot of work to set up both connections to both credit bureaus. So that means that, if you're only running one credit check, you could potentially be missing some real red flags from renters. So especially if there's a collection or bankruptcy being reported to the other bureau that you don't have access to. And in many cases, we notice that credit scores differ significantly depending on whether or not they caught those red flags. So in this case, for example, Mary, our current example tenant here, has a 700 Equifax credit score, but on TU, they have a 600 credit score because they actually found a lot more issues. So debts and collections, bankruptcies, and legal items on file. right? And then on page 1, we even show you the difference between the two. So in this case, hey, this person, we've registered more monthly payments, a higher debt load. So we found trade lines that didn't exist on Equifax, and we found that there's a lot more warning signs. Lastly, the cool thing about this now is that you actually have access to both credit reports. As you scroll down past the rental application and go to the Equifax report, you'll see the credit bureaus for both the Equifax report, credit score, the debt payments, the summary, the trade lines, and then you can proceed to the TU right after that. So you really get a lot more information with this dual report. You can click through all the trade lines. So you can see now we've got quite a few more trade lines for TransUnion compared to Equifax. And we also got a few bankruptcies and collection data that we didn't have on the previous bureau. So it is a great way to kind of just make sure you get the full picture, make sure you don't miss any red flags to enable you to make the right decision when approving a tenant for the lease. So that was one of our product updates. Another really cool thing, guys, is that we find that about 20% of our rental applications, typically it's a couple applying together, right? So to make that process even easier, we've built what's called the co-applicant invite. So when the rental application gets sent to the tenant, let's say John is our primary applicant, John adds Sally as their co-signer. Now, Sally, we can actually send her an automated invite to do a rental application as well. So both of them will be invited to actually do a credit check automatically. John has the option to kind of uncheck that. If he doesn't want her to get an invite to do a credit check, they can disable it. But this way you can make sure that all adults in the property can actually get invited to do a credit check. So to make sure you're not missing any important credit data that you should have access to. And then lastly, if there's a co-signer, we can also automatically send them an invite to also do a credit check. So you can get the full financial history for that co-signer as well. So what will happen now is that the co-signer will get an invitation. They will appear as a different user on the portal. So if this is my primary applicant and I click on the primary applicant and I scroll down to the occupant section under my rental application, which would be right there, I can see that the primary applicant here has added a first co-applicant and a second co-applicant as well as a co-signer. So the cool thing about this now is that, hey, if these other folks have actually already run a report, I can click here and go directly to that report, and I can see how the different folks are linked together. So if I just hover over this, that'll take me back to the co-applicant, to the primary applicant report, right? And I have the ability to, if the co-applicant, so in this case, the first co-op was sent an invite, they completed the rental application and we ran the report and we made it available to you right away automatically. But the second co-op has gotten the invite, but they haven't completed it yet, right? And you even have the option to invite them directly from the co-applicant or occupant kind of flow. So, it is a bit more of a nuanced kind of a conversation, but it is something that it really can help a lot of small lenders as well as property managers automate and make sure that they can easily get the full picture from every adult in the property or in the lease and easily be able to kind of figure out who is applying together. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that if you do go back to the index page, you're trying to figure out, okay, well, hey, I just ran a bunch of reports now. I'm confused. Who's applying together? Who's not? Well, there's a couple of different ways. First, you can just look at the address and you can notice that these three applicants have applied together to 88 Hyde Park. And if you actually hover over these, you can see that, hey, the first co-op was actually invited by the primary applicant and the second co-op was also invited by the primary applicant. And you get a sense of who are the folks that are applying together on the same lease. So again, a step forward to make the process of screening tenants much easier and more comprehensive. The last thing I wanted to mention, a new feature that we also brought to market recently is our tenant portal. So now what that means is that as a landlord, if I go ahead and actually run a report on Mary and Mary goes, pays for that report during the invite, oftentimes the renters will call into SingleKey and say, hey, I paid for this credit report, can I have a copy? And we're obliged to share with them. Well, the good news is that now they don't have to call in anymore. They can automatically get a copy of their report by logging into our tenant portal. Mary will get an email to say, hey, thank you for completing your rental application. We've compiled the report, sent it to your landlord. By the way, if you'd like to get a copy of that report, just click here and create a SingleKey account, verify your identity, and you'll be able to get a free report, the report that you paid for. You'll have access to it in a secure manner. So this is a way to kind of make sure that tenants are getting some value out of this program as well and be able to have access to their credit data.
We got a couple of questions I think might be kind of timely to answer right now while you've got the co-applicant up. Jessica asked, if we add another applicant or co-signer, does each person have to pay for the credit run? And does it affect the credit score?
So Jessica, I think, if the primary applicant added these two guys on their rental application, so you didn't do that, but they did, then when the invite goes out to the other co-applicants, they will be asked to pay for it, right? So we're not charging the landlord, we're charging the co-applicant. If they want to be able to actually do an application and put forth their credit information for the lease to improve their odds of being approved. Now, if you don't want them to pay, there is a way to kind of bypass this. The way I would do it is I would just go into the rental application and I would just invite both of them at the same time. So I would create an application where I would do primary tenant. So like, let's say tenant 1 and then tenant 2, right? So now I can go ahead and invite both of them. In this case, I can choose to pay for both of them right away, in which case there's no need for them to get an invite and pay for it. And here I'll just say, I will pay for both these reports and it'll charge me for both applications at $25 each, right? While I have you guys on this page, something really cool I wanted to mention as well. So these are the 3 different product options that you have access to. We've got a couple of new ones coming up soon. We'll announce these on the next call, on next month's webinar. But just in time for back to school, if you have any international applicants applying to your rental, we can now, and this is a first SingleKey product offering, we can now pull credit checks from over 1.5 billion records across the globe, and these are the top 13 countries of new arrivals to Canada. So they basically cover up to 80% of new arrivals to Canada. So this gives you the ability to actually screen somebody that just got here and they don't have local credit. So it's a really kind of like a step in kind of in a new direction here. And it's $59 per applicant. And this is something that you have to invite them. You can't do a self-serve report here. They do have to get the invite because they have to basically log into their local bureau, run a report, and then we'll get a copy and make it available to you as well. And for more information on that, just go to the International Credit Check page here on our website, and there'll be a lot more information on how it works. So yeah, back to you, Mac.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So Hannah, I'm going to bring you back in here.
Awesome. Thanks, Mac. So I'm going to be going over a bit of the details regarding our rent guarantee program here at SingleKey, what it all covers, and then I'll run through how we can get your tenants approved as well. So basically, the rent guarantee program, it's really designed to take the risk out of renting your property. I know we have a lot of Ontario landlords here today, and specifically in Ontario, with wait times of 8 or 9 months to evict a tenant, you really can't risk losing out on that long rental income, right? So basically, we're going to cover your rent for up to 12 months for the time it'll take to evict that non-paying tenant. We're also going to cover you for the paralegal and the legal fees, and we'll connect you with one of our partners in order to do that. I know a lot of landlords I speak to, they haven't gone through this process themselves, or if they had, it was a nightmare to deal with. So right away, we'll connect you with one of our paralegal partners to assist and help with filing all of the documentation and the paperwork with the tenant board in your jurisdiction. We're also going to cover you for up to $10,000 in malicious property damage. They rip up the floorboards, they're punching holes in the wall. You're covered for up to $10,000 of vandalism there as well. In addition to that, with the rent guarantee fee, you're going to be covered for the lease break as well. So if a tenant, they're not giving proper notice, they just, they move with giving you a week's notice, we'll cover you for 30 days to give you time to find a new tenant. And then we'll also include the rent collection and reimburse you for the cost of 2 tenant reports once you sign up for the rent guarantee. So a question I get asked a lot is, okay, I've signed up for the rent guarantee. What do I do when my tenant stops paying? I'm going to go through the demands process and how we assist you with the defaults. So basically, you've found a tenant, you've done your proper due diligence and screened them, and you've got them set up for the rent guarantee. If after a few months they do stop paying, you can let us know right away. We're actually going to be able to help you with sending out the notice of the non-rent payment. So if you need assistance with this, your first time dealing with this, we'll help mail out the notice. Sometimes the tenant ends up paying, maybe it's a one-off month, they got paid late or whatever the case is, and they end up paying the landlord, so we can dismiss it. But if not, then like I mentioned, we're going to connect you with one of our paralegal partners so they can help you file at the tenant board and make sure that's all done correctly. Typically for the first month that the tenant defaults, it takes about 30 days to get your first payment. But then for the next months that it takes to evict the tenant, we'll keep paying you the rent at the beginning of the month. So you're still able to cover your mortgage and other property costs. Throughout that process, we're also going to be helping you reach out to the tenant, trying to mediate the situation, come up with a payment plan if possible. But if not, we'll make sure that the tenant is evicted. And then I guess to speak more about one of the cases we've recently gone through, because quite often, I talk to landlords who they'll screen their tenants, the report looks good, they look like they've got a good job, and they'll ask me, why do I need the rent guarantee? This looks like a good tenant. Quite a few of the demands that we work on, tenant did look good initially, and then life happens, right? So we had one recently where the tenant, they had a job initially. Their credit report was decent. Both myself and the landlord had actually reached out to the employer reference initially, and the tenant was working. They had the income to support the rent. But after a few months, the tenant had actually lost their job and then stopped paying completely. And they weren't reaching out to either myself or the landlord to come up with a payment plan. They just totally ghosted both our team and the landlord, and we ended up moving forward with the eviction. But it wasn't just the non-payment that the landlord had to deal with. After the tenant ended up being evicted after 7 or 8 months, the tenant actually had tried to burn down the property. The landlord sent me pictures, and their walls were all black, covered in smoke, and the tenant had left a bunch of garbage and personal belongings behind. So right now, the landlord's working on getting a judgment for that as well to cover them for their losses there. But just kind of goes to show you that, you can do your proper screening initially, but the program's really meant to cover you in those cases where life happens and you can't predict those types of things that'll come up, right?
And this is actually a continuation of what you're just kind of talking about, which is kind of the demands process for the Rent Gurantee program. So, I spent some time this morning to actually go and chat with our demand team and pull in some numbers from typical demands that we're processing on a monthly basis. Our goal here, guys, as kind of the Rent Gurantee provider, really is to become that kind of back office risk management solution that is working behind the scenes. And hey, if everything works great, you picked a good tenant and they're paying rent on time, well, you won't really hear from us. But the second they stop paying, that's really when we spring into action to really kind of, work with a tenant to mediate, find a solution, and if we can't get them to pay, to really take legal action and get them out of there and save you the trouble, the headache, the stress, and ultimately also cover your losses during that process of going through the legal process. So I put together some numbers to actually give you a sense of what's going on here behind the scenes at SingleKey. So first things first, let me start at the beginning. So right now, we have about 22 evictions in progress on our Rent Gurantee portfolio. Some of these actually obviously started before, the July 1st. Others were just hit them, basically just kind of started this month. And this kind of fluctuates from time to time, right? Depending on where we're at in terms of like the state of the LTB, especially when it comes to Ontario evictions, which are, most of our portfolio is in Ontario, or about half of it is in our Ontario, even though we offer this program, Canada-wide. So the 22 hearings that we have in progress right now, it's taking about 6 to 8 months to get a hearing. Once we do get that eviction hearing, typically if we do have to call in the sheriff, that'll take another 1 to 2 months, depending on the region that it's happening. On average, our claim size is about $26,000. So that includes typically a number of lost rental income, primarily lost rent plus legal fees. So far, the highest demand we've had in 2024 has been about $39,000. So that was actually happening in Richmond Hill. It took us about the full 12 months to get the tenant out. We got the hearing in 10 months, but then we had to wait another 2 months to get the sheriff out there because the tenant wouldn't vacate. Out of that, the majority was lost rent, $1,500 in legal fees and court fees and sheriff fees and everything else and notices. But luckily, no damage to the property. I think 2021 was our highest eviction ever, which was closer to $60,000, and that was in London, Ontario. And in that case, we had basically a full 12 months of lost rent, legal fees, plus we also had about $10,000 worth of damage under the property as well, because the basement was in really bad shape. So that gives you a sense of kind of what's going on. Here's the typical types of demands that we see. So in terms of types of demands, about half of them are regarding rent default. We do get a lot of lease breaks. We actually also cover cases where if the tenant just basically takes off without notifying, giving you proper 60 days notice, in that case, we'll cover 1 month or 30 days of lost rent to give you time to find a new tenant and place them on the unit to fill that vacancy, right? So we do get quite a lot of those because a lot of tenants don't give proper notice to the landlord, so they end up losing a month's rent. And then about 10% of these are damage claims. These are a bit more rare, but they do happen every year as well. In terms of the common reasons for non-payment of rent, and these tend to be the most kind of like the biggest claims because it takes such a long time to get a tenant out. Half the time is usually related to job loss or financial difficulties. I found personally that this number has gone up recently. It used to be that we had a lot of professional tenants intentionally not wanting to pay the rent, so we had to get them out. But now, given that the market's slowing down a bit, we're seeing more unemployment in the labor market. We are finding people that are having trouble covering, either they got laid off or maybe they went from full-time to part-time or their hours got cut. And because they were already stretched to begin with, given that the rent's been very, very expensive or very high, it's gone quite a bit in the recent months or this year post-COVID, a lot of folks are having trouble making ends meet. So they're stopping paying rent. I think Cheatham or Hannah here can tell you a lot of stories about how we try to help this segment of customers, either putting them on payment plans or connecting them to the local rent bank to see if they can cover some of those payments and subsidize the rent, but ideally keep them in place and not have to evict them right away, to see if we can buy them 3 or 6 months of time to either find a new job or to get their finances in order and be able to pay rent on time. Another big one for us is breakup or divorce. This happens quite often. So two tenants will move in together. We will approve them because their combined income will be enough to cover the rent. But individually, if one of them takes off or there's a breakup or divorce, that typically leads to them not paying rent. But 1 in 5 cases that we deal with for eviction claims is due to family issues or breakups. Then lastly, in terms of kind of top 5 cities for evictions, this is over the past 6 months in 2024. We're seeing a lot in Welland, Fort Erie, and Hamilton area in Ontario. We've seen quite a few also in the Chatham, London region. We've gotten quite a few in Barrie. Outside of Ontario, Surrey, BC, and Edmonton, Alberta have been 2 other kind of centers where we've had quite a few claims. But I hope this kind of gives you a kind of like a high-level picture of kind of what we're dealing with in terms of rent guarantee demands, some interesting stats to show you the type of risk that landlords are facing in this market right now. And happy to dive into this with more if you guys have any more questions during the Q&A.
Let's go right to the next one. Okay, David, can you confirm that all methods and solutions you discussed are legal and allowed in Ontario? Viler, you want to take that one?
Yeah, for sure. David, I think as a company, we've had to come up with a good process to be able to offer a scalable program here that can work for everybody. One change that we've had to make previously, we used to actually allow landlords to kind of like fight their own evictions, take the court to the LTB themselves. We found that was a really bad idea because as a small landlord, you're only doing this once or twice, and that's if you're unlucky, right? Whereas as a business, we're doing this 20 times a month, right? So we get a lot better at kind of dealing with these types of legal cases, and not just we, but I mean, our paralegal teams that we work with, we do contract out paralegal teams in Ontario and Alberta and BC, everywhere we offer the program. And they get a lot of reps, they get a lot of practice with going through this legal process. So we have a good sense of how to get tenants out quickly. So for that reason, we try to basically make sure that, hey, if you do get a default, let us deal with it, right? Let us hire professionals and take it to court and get them out in short order so that we can reduce the size of the losses and the claim size as much as possible. And obviously, because we work with professional paralegals, we have to follow the law to the T in how we do this. And as a company, we have more liability than your average landlord, so we have to be very careful on how we go about our eviction proceedings.
Absolutely. We are compliant in each of the provinces. All right. Okay. How do you calculate rent for tenants, today's market value? This sounds like more of it's like a general landlording question. I can kind of run with this one. Yeah, it's solely based on what the market's willing to pay. You want to do your research in your local area and compare a like property rent you're going for. Probably the mistake that catches all the new landlords is understanding if the rent includes utilities or not. Is that that's throwing a big delta on the rent price. But it's very much based on their going rent in your area. If you're having trouble finding comparables in your area, and you're probably doing a 2 to 3 kilometer radius, that's probably a good sign that there's not a lot of supply out there, and then there's more demand out there to allow you to charge a little bit more for your rent. Okay, next question. Hey, Jessica, what if they get rejected for that home and they move on to another application? I believe renters have the option to share their SingleKey profile with another landlord. Viler, do you want to chew on this one?
Well, of course. I mean, that's really kind of the reason for that tenant portal is that, hey, if you do decline them and they need to kind of apply it elsewhere, the idea here is that they don't have to pay again to run a new report, and they don't have to get another credit hit when the new landlord runs a credit check on them. So it's a way to really kind of like save them some cost and also like protect their credit in the long term. Our credit check is kind of like a soft check in the sense that, it won't really kind of have an immaterial impact on your credit check, but it's still not great to have 10 inquiries, if you're out there applying for a month.
Yeah, and I'll add on to it. I mean, this is another comment that gets asked quite often: is SingleKey a hard check? And it's really a bit of a gray area. It's not that it's a hard check or a soft check. That's kind of the typical way to look at it. It is hard in the sense that we do show up as an inquiry on the credit report. That said, though, we don't have any weighting on our check mean. We don't have a financial number. We're not checking for a $500 credit card or $10,000 car loan. The more dollar amount tied to the credit check has more material impact on your credit score, and we have 0 because we're just simply checking your credit score, but we do show up. So and it's not really either.
In fact, all rental credit checks do show up on your inquiries list on your credit report, but because you're not applying for a loan, they don't really have a big impact on your credit score.
Yeah,
and really, exactly. It's up to the credit bureaus to determine that. It's not really, it's outside of our control.
Is it possible to enlist just for the rental guarantee program and insurance? If so, what is the fee?
Yeah, for sure. So for the rent guarantee program, we have two different cost options. Either 5.5% of the rent if you wanted to pay on a monthly basis, or 5% of the annual rent if you pay for the full year up front. You can enlist just for the rent guarantee. You don't have to use the rent collection, but we would ask that you still run the tenant's report through our platform, pull their credit history and do that public database scan, just so we can make sure there's no red flags on the tenant as opposed to them providing their own credit report.
Yeah, and just to add on to this, because David asked a good question as well, is, hey, do they have to do the PAD, the pre-authorized debit rent collection, to be on the rent guarantee? They don't. So that's actually optional for us. If you're on the rent guarantee, you're able to use our rent collection tool or pre-authorized debit collection tool for free, but it's not a requirement. So if you like to collect your own rent, you're free to do that. In which case, just notify us when the tenant stops paying, and then we'll start our demand process. But it's not a requirement on our program.
Can we hire you to do the eviction part?
Dominic, I hate to turn away business, but I think our goal here is really to be more of a full service program. So really, while we have some great partners we can refer you to, I recommend working with paralegals for the eviction part. Or if you'd like to have a good paralegal, happy to refer to the ones that we work with and we've had great experiences with.
Can tenants be placed in collections?
I can take this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Viler.
So, Luisa, when you do hire us to pay out on the rent guarantee, one of the requirements is that you do give us the authority to basically collect from the tenants. Now, typically, our insurance company has the right to collect from the tenant. I would say from our experiences that they rarely do, just because it's not worth their time and effort a lot of the times. So while we do have the right to go after the tenants for collections, we typically don't.
Are you covering rooming houses in Toronto as well?
Yeah, good question. Typically for the rent guarantee, it would need to be a separate rental unit. Currently, we don't do rooming houses for the rent guarantee.
Is it the best way to look at it, Hannah, is we guarantee by the lease?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So as long as the roommates are all in the same lease, we're able to guarantee that entire unit. But the problem is that you have multiple leases under the same unit. It makes it very difficult for us to separate the risk. So the only way we can really underwrite is to make sure that every occupant on that unit is on the rent guarantee or on the same lease.
Well, any experience with potential tenants suing for human rights discrimination for not accepting their application through SingleKey? I'll jump on this, and then Hannah or Villa, feel free to call us in. We're obligated to follow all the applicable jurisdictional laws. So whether it's human rights, the RTA in your province, we have to be compliant. So we don't make the decision. Really, at the end of the day, the due diligence and the decision making lies with you, the homeowner who's making the choice to rent out to the individual tenant. We're supporting you in that process by providing you as much information to make that informed decision. We don't make these decisions, so it's actually up to you to make sure you're following proper law in your area.
Yeah, Mac, I can add a bit to that to say that, hey, we're constantly in conversations with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, and we have to be compliant with PIPEDA rules for privacy data and information. So that's something that we're constantly being audited and have to be in compliance with. It's something that we always keep under consideration for every type of tool or data that we bring into our report.
Since Ontario won't allow landlords to require pre-authorized payments or post-dated checks, how does that impact your rent collection methodology? Well, we use the same payment rails that you would pay a utility bill of a checking account. It's called pre-authorized debit. It's all automated. No. They grant you permission to do it.
Yeah, we covered it in the sense that it's not mandatory. This is an option that you offer to the tenant, and the tenant has the right to refuse and pay, via checks or e-transfers or however they like. But it's freely available to all rent guarantee customers.
That's it for the questions. I think if there's no other questions, we'll give you a couple more minutes to get one in here. That said, this is being recorded, so everyone that's registered for the webinar, even if they didn't show up today, you'll have a copy emailed out here shortly in the next 24 hours.
First of all, thank you for attending us and kind of just giving us your time today. And following the call, we'll send an email with kind of a booking link to our Rent Gurantee sales team that Hannah, Alex, and Andrew are part of. So if you have any more questions, feel free to book a call with them and they can go into a lot more detail.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And David wrapped up one more quick question here. Do you have to use pre-authorized debit for the rent guarantee?
Yeah, you don't have to. Most landlords just pay on their credit card. We'll just set up a monthly payment. You can pay via pre-authorized debit, but primarily people just use their credit card.
Right, and you don't have to collect rent PAD from the tenant as well. You can collect your own rent however you like. Yeah.
That said, though, if you do choose to use a pre-authorized debit or a rent collection tool, it does streamline it and make the process a lot quicker. We can respond quicker because now we see the same information you do with the rent being not paid at the beginning of the month.